Hello, folks. Right, let's see if this is working. Give me a second. I just got a couple of things I need to do. Jane, can you speak for me?
Hello, I can speak
Yeah,
to you now, Tony.
I can hear
Yes.
you. Can you also just put your mic closer to your... Because I got these on now, it's not coming through.
Yeah, is that better?
Yeah, no
Okay.
echo?
I've got no echo from you, no.
Okay, right, bear with me. Let me just get everything sorted with YouTube.
Okay.
Folks, we're really sorry about this. It's been an absolute nightmare.
It's a journey, Tony.
Aye, it's a
It's a
journey, all right?
learning journey, as everything is.
I'd give in, but it's like everything works perfectly until you go bloody live.
I know. We've been practicing this afternoon, haven't we?
I
And
know.
there were a few wrinkles, but we sorted them. So yeah, yeah,
Right,
yeah.
just give me 1 second. I'm just getting things sorted out, which I normally do when I have that 10 minutes spare. Um, all the
Do you want me to look at
questions.
I've got
Oh,
some
the chat is
questions
coming
here.
back in.
Oh,
Bear with
good.
me.
Good, good.
Right. Well, that's a nightmare, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
It's
Refresh.
good to show that it doesn't always go smoothly. A
No, it
lot of
doesn't.
effort goes into this.
Oh, I
And
know, it's crazy. Right, I'll just
yeah,
set up the questions thing again, guys, because obviously it's a different thing. Bear with me. Uh, I think.
do you want me to answer one of these questions, Tony? Because
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
got
you
one in
carry
front of me
on.
here. Okay, we have got the Warrioress of Cumbria says, can you please tell us where we can find some sort of chart about when we should start planting what and where? What I would say is if you go on to Google, just type in companion planting chart. There are so many. You will probably be blinded by science. But there is one, and I think I usually have it nearby. I can't see it. But it's I think it's by the Permaculture Society. And that is really, really good. It doesn't just tell you what to plant, but it tells you what not to plant with other crops. So well worth looking at. So you can print one off for nothing, really, if you want to. Well worth looking into.
I'm still getting the echoes but I'm trying to work on it. A second. Um, Let me just turn that down. Right, Jing, if you keep speaking a sec, just so I can get this sorted.
Tony, right, okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now,
Hang
Tony?
on.
Can anybody hear me? Can you hear me? You see, it's no good me asking the
Jane?
chat because, hello?
Yeah, I still got
Can
you,
you,
sorry. Yeah, I've
you've
got you
got me.
back.
Okay, good, good.
God.
Okay.
Right, I give up. It's just going to have to be the way it is for today, guys, and we'll have to deal with it again. And if not, I'm chucking this software away. Right, okay.
Okay.
Right, let's have a look what's going on here. I'm going to go back to the questions, and hopefully people have started putting some in there. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, Hefner, beans, greens, potatoes, or tomatoes? Hefner, I
Well,
don't get what that is about. So if you want to elaborate on that, that'd be great. Danny,
I
hi both. What have you found the best two companions in your garden?
myself and Mike. He's my best companion, and he's a good companion planter as well. I would just say calendula. If you need to start with any one plant, it's calendula, which is really what we've always called marigold, but it's just in the last couple of years we've called it calendula. Not to be mixed up with tagetes, I've checked the pronunciation, which is the French marigold.
Yeah.
That's the one. That's the basic one to get started with.
Okay. So for me, it's got to be nasturtiums because they are fabulous for getting away all sorts of pests from your crops. They'd rather, lay their eggs on nasturtium leaves. They'd rather go and take the nectar from nasturtiums. It's just a really good plant that just and they're pretty as well. There's flowers everywhere. They drop their seeds, so they come back all the time. They're just really, really handy.
And you can eat them.
Yeah, absolutely. The
You can eat
leaves
them
and the
as well.
flowers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice peppery leaves. So, Rue's asking, when I think of companion planting and those I've used, I'm aware of 2 together. Are there situations where you can use more than 2?
Well, I mean, the oldest sort of, this is what I was saying earlier on about the fact that people might now think that companion planting is just a bit of a newfangled thing, like they thought vegetarianism was in the 70s. They'll grow out of it. It's about 10,000 years ago, the indigenous Americans were using that system known as the Three Sisters, which is the oldest known use of companion planting, where they grew sweet corn, which grew nice and strong and upright. That provided the structure for the beans to grow up. The beans helped to fix nitrogen in the soil, which helped the squash, which scrambled across the ground, and the squash suppressed the weeds and that kept the moisture in the soil for the other 2 plants to grow. So that is just a perfect example of a symbiotic. I'm saying symbiotic, it's 3. A relationship between 3 plants that everything benefited each other.
Yeah.
But again, that's something I've tried and it's not worked.
Well, and I'll tell you the biggest failing that most people have with the Three Sisters, and that is that they plant everything the same time.
Absolutely.
And beans grow much faster than corn.
Yeah.
And the idea of corn is to be that structure that beans climb, right?
Yeah.
So you need to plant your corn about 4 to 6 weeks earlier and then put the bean seed in the ground, not a plug plant, right?
Yeah.
So your corn's already 6 weeks ahead of the bean before you start. And then obviously once that starts going, then put your squash plug plants out and around. And that will get the corn off to a good start. But when you have bad weather, corn doesn't get that high here if it's windy and everything else. So, and beans will go 6, 8, 10 feet, so that's the biggest issue. Now, for another thing that I don't think a lot of people think about is things like permaculture gardens and cottage gardens where everything is all in one place. That is a form of companion planting.
It is.
And, you will jar 50 plants together and they're all different. And that's a form of companion planting. And I think people they see one thing that's, oh, this is companion planting. And they don't think of all this other stuff that's happened beforehand because someone's put the terminology to it,
It's like anything nowadays. Everything seems to have a label and needs to be attached to something. But it's just giving what we've been doing for many, many years a label, a particular name.
Absolutely. So Alan is asking, what part of the UK are you from, Jane?
I'm living in central part of the UK. I'm in Staffordshire. So I think the equivalent in the US is Zone 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting because we're Zone 8A here.
Okay, so, I think we're on that margin between 7 and 8, but yeah.
So guys, just to remind you, put your questions into the question and answer page. Otherwise, I'm not going to find them in the chat, in the live chat. So click the live top and Q&A section and then put your questions down there. So Adam Heath is asking, my allotment plot has a small pond. Is there any aquatic plants that will help to attract beneficial insects?
I'm going to hand that one over to you, Tony, because you've got a fantastic pond on your plot.
Yeah, there are tons.
So what have you planted?
you
Yeah.
know, there are all sorts, and to be honest with you, most of them will attract the insects. But things like lilies, water lilies, are fantastic because not only do they put out a really good flower for pollinating insects, they have great big lily pads that other insects will rest on. The skimmers really love sort of swimming around them because, and the great thing about those sort of plants is they create shade, and you have you know, things like the irises and the water buttercups and all of these things create like a natural underwater root system, and it does goes mental when I dismantle my pond, because I will be, because I'll be making a bigger one at some point. You'll see that the network of root system that's underneath there is unbelievable, and all of those insects just love getting in around those. It creates food for them, it creates safety, you know, but pretty much anything, even like CRISPR, you know, the oxygenation plants and those sort of things, they're all ideal as well. But the important thing is just to have that body of water that will attract insects and other wildlife into the garden, because just having that water in itself will really bring them in, because after all, we all need water. Right, next one. Sound is perfect now. Okay, well, great. I don't know what's
Phew.
happening there. Um, do you know, it's funny.
Keep everything crossed.
Yeah, because I'm going to tell a little story here, Jane, just to, because
Oh
it's
dear.
quite funny. Like, all of the times, like, I've helped Jane and Danny with their channels and stuff, and every time we've had a technical issue, it's been on Jane's microphone side of things. And today it's me.
Not today.
No, not today.
Oh, no.
So it's all my fault today, guys. So
Thank you.
but
Thank you.
yeah, I believe you've got a new mic though, Jane, right?
Yes, I have. I didn't dare come on without having my mic sorted tonight.
So all the planning we done not to have this screw up, and I screw it up. Well, it is what it is, isn't it? I'm still trying to figure out why that. For some reason, the headphones are working, but as soon as I put this software on, they don't work. So I'm gonna have to look into that. But it's something else.
We're getting through it, Tony. It's fine.
Yeah. So I'm going to change back to the normal chat for a minute because there's no more questions in. So Jane, what about you know, things like with potatoes and stuff like that? Are you you know, are you thinking about companion planting with potatoes and stuff?
Well, I'm going to tell you something. I mentioned this earlier on about don't be under the illusion that you can just plant anything together and if it looks nice, that's good. Because I had heard about sunflowers, a theory about do not plant sunflowers near potatoes. And the idea is the sunflowers they exude a chemical. I think it's called allelopathy. I said it once and quickly, allelopathy. And they exude a chemical from their roots, which can inhibit growth from all sorts of plants, but particularly potatoes. It can really stunt their growth. So what I did last year, I had my various rows of potatoes in, but I almost did a sacrificial row of potatoes up by the chicken coop, where I put sunflowers next to them. And sure enough, as I dug towards the center of the row, the potatoes were not as good as they were at the end of the rows. Now, whether that was because of an allelopathic effect or whether it's just that they were fighting the nutrients and the water as much as the sunflower, which of course is a great big plant.
Yeah.
I don't know. So
What
I
would have
can't
been interesting?
prove.
What would have been interesting there is if you'd actually taken a soil sample and sent that away.
I'm so much for doing that this year, Tony, after seeing you talking about it.
Yeah.
Because I think around the plot, there will be several different types of soil. But to take it from near the sunflowers to see if
Yeah, so,
anything's
you
in
know,
it,
I mean,
yeah.
if you can find that, you know, maybe do your test again with 2 different rows in 2 different places, put sunflowers
Yeah.
next to one, and then take those soil samples before and after, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that way you can compare the like for like for each row and to see whether the sunflowers have actually made a difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be quite an interesting little video, I should imagine. I'm sure the guys here would like to see the results of that as well. So, so what's your plans this year then for the way you're planning your garden as far as companion planting?
To get as many perennial plants that will do as companion plants that I can. And by that I mean, yes, I'm talking about calendula. You know, if you walk down any allotment site, you will see loads of those. But there are things as well, such as your herbs. So
Your
perennial
mic is
plants
breaking up.
such. Is that me again? Is that me? Is that? I'm gonna keep talking and see what happens. That's like it's me. One second. Is that me, Tony?
I have to laugh because everything's gone tits up on this live today.
We're still smiling.
You sound like a Dalek.
That's unfair. Shall I pop out and pop in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, guys. So while we're at that, let's talk about a composting masterclass book. Sorry about this, guys. Like I say, it's one of those things. Um, it's funny because every time I get on with Jane, something happens with her mic. Today it's been mine, and now hers starts playing up. Anyway, composting masterclass, guys. Obviously available pretty much anywhere you want now, and this is a fantastic way of learning about the microbiology that's in the soil, how to sort of farm it, if you like, because that's really going to make a difference to make your plants stronger. And then when you're companion planting and things like that, you're providing all the nutrition that each of those plants needs for their own relative nutritional needs. Now, earlier on, I was asked about the next book that's coming. That's this one. It's Your First Vegetable Garden, and it's a big book, guys. I think it's like 110,000 words. It's a big book, and it's not going to be a cheap book. Only because of the amount of printing costs that it takes, but heart and soul has gone into this. So, if you're looking to grow a vegetable garden, there's going to be everything you possibly need in you, just like the composting book. And we're just in the process of finishing this one up, and then making that available as well. So that won't be long either, right? So just bear in mind. I'm just going to... the other thing I think as well is you'll find that... bring Jane back in here a sec. The other thing that I think you'll find is that book will hopefully have a better launch than the first one, with Amazon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it available first on Amazon and get that live before I start pushing it and telling you where you can buy it and everything else. All right. Right. So let's bring Jane back in. Hiya, Jane.
Hello.
That's better.
Is that better now? Oh, honestly, that's so unfair, because I was really happy to leave all the mic problems with you, and then they come back to me.
Yeah. It's not in audio. I will eventually put it in audio. At the moment, I just want to concentrate on getting the books out because it's been a nightmare. Tina will tell you. I have been here working every day that I'm not in work. I'm down here all day just writing and everything else, because not only is the second one coming out, but I've got to finish writing the third one by the 20th of March for the publishers, because that's the date they've given me. So I'm trying to do 2 books at once here. It's been an absolute nightmare. And I won't do that again, I can tell you. But the third book will be out on in 2024. but they needed it all ready by March 20th. So I'm trying to finish off the second book and the third book at the same time. The books are written, but it's just all of the other crap that's got to go with it, like, pulling up all the photos and charts and this, that, and the other, which is what I'm doing at the moment. But the second one should be sort of like February, March time, so just bear on mind. And eventually, later in the year, I may even sit down here and record the voiceover for it myself and then release it on audio as well. Okay, so let's see if there's any more questions that have come through on that. So guys, what are you doing in your gardens? What sort of companion planting do you do? Put it down in the chat and maybe we can talk about that as well. Right, next one. So can Jane explain the benefits of allelopathy?
Yeah, if I could say it, I probably could. No, it's just that some plants do exude a chemical. Now, there must be a benefit to that particular plant. So if I'm saying that sunflowers exude a particular chemical, it's got to be it's doing them some good. So whether it's to get rid of competition, to let them thrive, I've got to say, I don't necessarily know. And that's the whole chemical side, the whole scientific side is still quite new. And it's something that I will be looking into. So I can't explain it exactly. All I know is it's something that prevents you planting two particular plants together. So instead of companion planting, where they assist each other, if they've got what we'll call an allelopathic relationship, they will hamper each other's growth. So that's all I can say on that one.
Okay.
It's still new to me.
Okay, brilliant. So Andrew's next one, this is for me. Is it on Audible, Tony? Andrew, Composting Masterclass is on all formats. So it's on Audible, print, hardback and softback, and it's on ebook. The second book will only be on print to start. Eventually it'll end up on Audible as well. Okay. Adam Heath, is it worth dedicating one bed amongst my others at the plot for cut flowers and interplanting annuals as opposed to planting amongst the veg itself?
Is that for me or you?
For you.
Okay. I would say if you've got the space and your allotment site allow for you to grow flowers in a particular spot, because I know a lot of allotment sites, you're not allowed to grow more than 5% of non-edibles. Yes, you could, but for me, interplant them with your veg. Like you were saying before, Tony, that the whole thing of when we look back at cottage gardens of ye olde days, and everyone says, weren't they beautiful?
Yeah.
They had to have the veg in there. In fact, they had the veg in there first and foremost.
Yeah.
They just put a few flowers in for the benefit, but just to make it look nice. So for me, rather than just have one bed full of one thing, you're always going to benefit trying to mix things up a bit.
Yeah, and it's the
You're
way
gonna
I
create
used
a
to
better
grow.
ecosystem.
Yeah, it's the way I used to grow at the last garden I had. And then when I came to this garden, because the last garden was all raised beds and this garden wasn't, and I was growing in the ground, I tended to go down the militant rows of growing, like an allotment, all right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
as I'm slowly taking this garden over into individual beds and putting in raised beds and everything else and how I want the structure and things, this year I'm going to make a concerted effort to actually mix that. Because I think as well, if you have one area, and this is my belief behind it, if you have one area that's really, infested with pests, for argument's sake, you only lose a bit of each of the crops rather than everything of one crop.
Absolutely.
So, it's much harder for the cabbage white, for instance, to, go all over the garden and catch every single cabbage, whereas you only need them to go on a couple of cabbages in a whole patch of cabbages, and then them caterpillars spread to the whole lot. So,
Absolutely.
I think there's benefits to that sort of gardening as well,
And also, there's if you have just got blocks, so one thing at a time, there is, I mean, we talk about crop rotation, but if you're going to grow the same thing over and over again, year on year, you are risking pests and diseases building up. And so, in the same way that you might rotate your crops, rotate what you put in there, put your flowers in amongst your veg, doesn't do any harm. I'd like to know when it's become the norm, if you like, as it has been for many, many years, to have all your vegetables in nice, neat rows. I used to work in it. I volunteered in a kitchen garden at a local National Trust place. And we were supposed to be recreating the garden from, I think it was the 1750s. And it was so regimented. We had to use the trowel.
But that was the
Everything
old
was so measured
Victorian
up.
style, wasn't it? And
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
was planned out in patterns around the garden, and it was down to the centimetre. You
Yeah.
couldn't have anything out of place. And and don't forget, these big country houses and manor houses back then, they had huge teams that were gardening.
And
That's
it was
where
a
a
status
lot.
symbol.
Well,
Yeah.
that's where a lot of the things like digging the garden came from, because they had these teams. They didn't have anything to do throughout winter, so the head gardener sent them out to turn the garden over just to
Yeah.
give them something to do. And of course, with all of that sort of stuff comes a loss of, they think they were doing right for the vegetables, but obviously we've been a little bit more educated now, knowing about soil health and the microbes and everything else that they didn't really understand so much back then. And but I mean, you can't fault, when they were growing, it just looked pristine. But
Absolutely. Oh,
that is easy for pests to take over.
I know. And the concentration was what you could see above the soil, not what was going on underneath.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah.
Yeah, cool. Right, let's jump on to the next one. And so that's Rose Life. Would you consider sacrificial planting part of companion planting? So slugs, favourites like French marigolds around your brassicas, for example. I would.
Absolutely. Yes.
What's
That's
the
just a
point in
yes.
companion planting anyway, if you're not going to do it for pest control?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
And you were mentioning nasturtiums earlier, Tony, with regard to having them near broad beans to try and distract the black
Black fly.
flies. I remember when I first put nasturtiums in and they were getting ravaged by black fly, and I was so upset. I was thinking, it's not working. The poor nasturtiums have been attacked. Well, of course, I just didn't understand. That
Yeah.
was the whole idea.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
that's it. I mean, and the good thing about it is you're providing somewhere for the likes of black fly to go. And then you're not having to deal with them on the plants you want to keep. Because after all, we're growing to eat, right? Yeah,
yeah,
we're putting these other plants in as sacrificial plants. And the great thing about it is, because we're not having to try and get them off because of they're not on the food we want to eat, then you can afford those plants to be decimated a little bit. But what that does, in that time, it allows all the good beneficial insects like lacewings and ladybirds and stuff to come into the garden. And once they're in your garden, they're happy to feed on them, but they clear up anything that lands on your vegetables then. So the idea of the companion planting is to have that plant be a sacrificial plant for the ones you want to keep. That's the whole idea behind it.
and I think
Okay.
a lot of people get a bit, they get impatient with it because it might not be happening straight away.
Yeah.
But it's again, it's all about getting the whole ecosystem working together and as one. It's like you're not going to plant nettles clearly in the middle of your vegetable patch, but you could call them a companion plant if you've got a patch down by your compost bin or somewhere out the way behind the shed. They are a haven for green fly, white fly, black fly, and in turn, you can just leave them alone because, like you say, they'll bring in all the ladybirds in, the lacewings, which feed off them, and then will spread into the rest of your garden. So
Yeah, if one of the admin can go to the channel and put in nettles in my channel, they'll be able to bring up a link for a video I did all about nettles and how beneficial they are in the garden.
Yeah.
So if one of you could do that, that'd be great. Whoops, did I just skip one then? Sorry. What else to keep companion planting as basic as possible? Personally, multiple basils, some for eating, some to bolt, just like cilantro and tons of different marigolds. What else that's basic like them?
Right, I would say this is what I was starting to do before I turned into a Dalek. So let's hope it works this time. Any sort of perennial herbs, get your herbs in. The purple flowers, you will notice most herbs have got like a bluey purple flower. And they are the flowers that, sorry, that's the colour that most insects will like. They like the purples, the bluey purples, the yellows. So if you've got mint, if you've got chives, if you've got sage, anything that's got those colours, you are drawing in beneficial insects. You don't have to do anything with them. Mint, contain it. Chives, chop and divide every now and then. Sage, trim back. They're all manageable, but you are not going to have to keep replanting them year after year. But they are the most beneficial things for insects. And if you think...
Lavender's another really good one.
Perfect,
Yeah.
perfect. Rosemary.
Yeah.
But you think that the colours that we see at the beginning of the year when the first flowers start coming out, they're the yellows, they're the purples, they're all the pastel-y colours.
Yeah.
And the reason is because those insects have been starving for the previous few months and they need something immediately and will go for those colour flowers.
Yeah, I agree.
Anything with those colours.
So Quiet Space is asking, what's the best companion for courgettes to stop earwigs attacking plants? I had hundreds, no kidding.
Ooh, my courgettes last year were horrendously bad, as in they hardly developed, and I can't say that about courgettes. I'm going to throw that over to you, Tony. Have you used
There's
anything?
not really a companion plant for it, but the best way of controlling earwigs is to get an old clay pot on top of a stake and fill it with straw. And if you just go there, then, in the morning, they'll all be up in there. You can just take that, pull the straw out, put it into a bag, get rid of it, and put new straw in it, put it in the night before. It's the best way of controlling earwigs. Apparently, they were pretty bad this year, but because I do that as a matter of course, I haven't really had that issue with my courgettes or zucchinis, whatever you want to call them. But I do that as a matter of course every year anyway, because look, pest control, the idea of companion planting is foreseeing that you're going to have pests and putting something there to control them. Well, if you haven't got a companion plant to use and you know a way of dealing with them, well, that you're going to get it in early so that when those earwigs do come, they're going to hide. You're going to notice any damage. The first thing you can do is going to take them away before they get out of hand, and that's the whole idea behind it. So
And again, Tony, you're saying you're doing it like as a matter of course.
yeah,
You're not thinking. It just becomes habit.
the problem is you
And
need
it's
to be
a great habit to get
proactive
into.
instead of reactive, Jane. And
Yeah.
and too many people are proactive in the garden. They go, oh my God, my beans are full of blackfly. It's too late at that point. You need to think about this before that happens. Get the companion plants in that will help deal with that. Now, don't get me wrong, we all get pest issues and everything else. Invariably, they don't do as much damage as most people think. It's only when they get to like infestation levels that, that it's an issue. But by that point, the beneficial insects are in anyway. So, but people need to be more reactive in the garden, I think. And the only way you're going to do that is be in the garden and looking and, not just, the problem is with some people, they go, right, I'm going to the garden today and I'm going to do this. And they go to the garden and they do that. They don't do anything else. They don't look at what's going on in the garden. And you need to take a step back sometimes and go, oh, look at that. What's that? And then get in there and have a look, And that will save you so much time and fuss.
And without wanting to sound too much like an old hippie here, isn't that part of us being the whole part of the garden and the whole ecosystem, and not going in and taking charge and thinking, we're going to do this, that, and the other,
Yeah.
but almost listening to what needs doing.
You're crackling again, Jane. So, Steve Digwell, do we really need pollinators on an allotment, as there are not many veggies that need help with fertilization?
Do you want me to answer?
Yeah, you can answer that.
Uh,
As a Dalek.
I'll come back.
So, guys, well, this is going well, isn't it? Look, Steve, I think we do. Because when you say no pollinators, and yes, we've got beans now that we've got beans that are self-pollinating, we've got tomatoes that are self-pollinating, you know, and all these other veg out there all can be hand-pollinated, then technically you wouldn't need any. But, you know, there's nothing like having an insect do the job for you. If you're breeding chilies and peppers, things like, you know, or courgettes or marrows or things like that, that you want to take a specific trait from, well, then you're going to need to hand pollinate, and you're going to need to control that, making sure no insects get in there. But look, I think the biggest issue that people have is they think we don't need insects, and they are what make this world go around, whether we like it or not. And why are we trying to sort of put a thumbs up to nature and say, you know, off you go? You know, at the end of the day, it worked really well before we came along. So why are we trying to change it?
Exactly.
Let's work with it, you know? Right, okay. Next question. Crop rotation is old school. You feed the soil and then you will have strong plants, and pests target weak plants. What's your thoughts, Jane?
I agree. I don't necessarily agree that crop rotation is old school. I think this whole thing about old school and, you know, you do what works for you. If you've got healthy soil, Tony, you are the master of this. If you've got healthy soil, you will have healthy plants. What I find is the neighbour who I mentioned earlier on, who uses chemicals galore, and he's got a lovely weed-free, pest-free garden. But if you dig,
But he's got no life either, so he's got a life-free garden.
there's no worms.
Yeah.
There's or very few. So his soil is so poor. So what he does, he puts doesn't necessarily put a mulch on. He doesn't necessarily put manure on, but he'll put liquid feed on, which is fine. But like you were saying, Tony, you're almost trying to fix the problem after it's happened.
Yeah. Look, you know, with soils, look, you know, the whole earth is full of microbial life. Just take a teaspoon, there's billions of bacteria and things like that in there, right? All of these things are doing what they need to do in order to produce the right nutrients that your plants are going to benefit from. Because at the end of the day, you know, they'll break down rocks into usable nutrients for plants, you know? So when you start pouring things on, and this is the issue and where crop rotation comes from. I'd done a whole live stream about it a couple of years ago with Gardener Scott. Now, what happened was the farmers started pouring glysulfate over everything because they wanted an easy life, and then they went and churned it all in by ploughing and everything else. What they did was decimate all of the life that was in the soil. And then the soils became poor, and with that you get erosion, you get soils that turn into sand, you get really poor water retention, and also you're having to spend a fortune feeding. And when you feed, it just runs right through because there's nothing to hold it in the soil, okay? Now, because of that, they then decided that they were going to grow single monocrops, you know, because it's easier for them. They can do a whole, you know, 100-acre field of corn, for argument's sake. They can churn it all down, pull off what they need. It's ideal for a farmer. So they need to crop rotate because that corn has pulled out all the nutrients that corn do. Well, they can't keep growing corn there, or it's just going to become a weak plant that's going to be susceptible to pest attacks. When you have a garden style we are growing and we are crop rotating without realizing it, because invariably you might grow potatoes here, and then as soon as you pull them potatoes out, you're not going to leave that soil go barren. You're going to put something else in. So effectively, you've crop rotated, because by the time the potatoes come back there, you've grown other things within that soil anyway. And because we're not growing these huge monocrops, the soil doesn't get depleted completely. And then if you're adding compost and building your soil and feeding the microbial life, they're replacing what was taken out. So yeah, crop rotation, it's not old school because it's actually something that's relatively new. Okay. You know, it's been brought in like some of the older ideas that farmers and gardeners had back then. They didn't understand what was going on beneath their feet. Now we do, and we can bring out some of the things. The only time I would say you need to rotate out is if you've got something like onion white rot or something like that. Well, that's going to take years to get out of the soil. So you or even something like brassica root rot and those things. Yeah, just move the plants away from them. But other than that, there is no need. I mean, I've grown tomatoes in the same bed for 10 years running. I don't ever get blight because blight is controllable. I don't care what people say, but it's all down to airflow and not stressing the plant out. If you're giving them adequate water, you're not getting all the leaves soaking and everything else, and you've got that good airflow, you're not going to get blight. So there's so many different things that are going on there. So next question from Garden Happens: would you consider planting different types or different varieties of brassicas together, as in companion planting?
You can plant them together, but I wouldn't necessarily call it companion planting because I would say they're all brassicas. Okay, so I wouldn't.
Yeah, there's no benefit there. Well, not really any benefit there, because cabbage white is still going to come in. It's going to lay across the whole lot, right?
Yeah.
So what we want is a plant to go in there to pull that cabbage white away, or to mask the smells or something like that. That's what we're looking for companion planting. Like the brassica family isn't really going to have anything like that that's going to benefit you.
It would be lovely if there was a plant that you could put next to brassicas that would prevent or even cure clubroot. Wouldn't that be fantastic?
It's called a lime tree.
Well, yeah.
Right.
But,
Planet Zog, late joiner, so sorry if it's already been asked. Is there any companion plants that will deter cabbage white butterfly from brassicas like cabbage, broccoli, etc.?
We were just saying about the nasturtiums. You've got to try and just attract them somewhere else and get them over to the nasturtium plants. I would plant them not necessarily in the middle, but just slightly off, so your caterpillars, your cabbage whites, and everything would go over there.
When you're companion planting, guys, consider what that insect wants. It's looking for somewhere that it can lay its eggs, it be protected, and then there's a food source for its young. And that's all it's looking for. Now, there are certain plants that it likes to do, like cabbage, but nasturtiums are a much easier plant for the young to digest. So over brassicas, they would lay on nasturtiums first. So consider things like that, right? So you've got to think about what that insect is looking at. If they're coming to eat, we'll provide them something that's a lot softer. That it's like black fly, for argument's sake. They always go to the tips of broad beans or fava beans, whatever you want to call them, because it's very succulent and it's easy for them for their little jaws to sort of munch into and everything else, right? So if you can provide an alternative that's just as soft and succulent and everything else, then provide that as a sacrificial plant. Okay, the English Lady's kitchen garden. I planted a grapevine last year. How many years before I can expect to eat grapes?
Oh, well, I was very lucky because we inherited one with our allotment, and it's at least 10 years old, but we've been there 3 or 4 years now and have beautiful crops every year. But I would say it's at least 2 years before you can start to pick without worrying about weakening the plant. What do you think, Tony?
So when you're buying a grapevine, it's usually just a small little single cane that goes in the garden. Now, if any of you've seen my grapes in my older tunnel, that tunnel has been there about 8 years. Those grapes were planted in there the year the tunnel went there, okay, as canes. So for the first 2 years, I spent just training out the structure that I wanted. But now each grapevine has 3 levels up the wall, spalliate, and then goes across 4 beams as well. So it's a massive plant, each of them. I mean, the trunks on them are like this now. And they're only 8 years old from a cane. But they were giving me grapes from year 2.
Yeah.
If you've got the soil right, you can get grapes from year 2. I would, if you're looking for structure like I was, I let a few sort of bunches appear in the second year. The third year, we had more than we knew what to do with. And then in the fourth year, I was giving grapes away to people for them to make wine out of. You know, it was crazy. Okay. Pam Clark, my goal for this year is to feed my soil. Great. I'm getting great success from following Tony's compost book. Thank you, Pam. I appreciate that. And I'm glad. In fact, Pam, after she had the book, was posting. She was making compost in one of her compost bins on Facebook group. She was posting pictures all the time. And it must have been what seems like 8 weeks. She was posting pictures of the temperature right in the ideal range.
Wow.
And that's because Pam learned the information from the book, put it into practice, implemented it, and got the compost to the temperature. And it was there for what seemed like forever. So I have no doubt that Pam's going to be pulling some stunning compost out of this bin when she's ready to go with it, because it was cooking for a long time.
And saving a fortune.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the prices are going up
I went
already.
to the garden centre the other day, and compost, just for even a crappy bag of compost, was like £8 and £9. I was like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah,
And,
I know.
on the size of garden that we have, Jane, Christ, you could go through a couple of £1,000 in compost a year, you know.
And you don't know what's in it. So,
Well,
yeah.
funny enough, Danny, I don't know if he's still in the chat. I didn't see him come back into the second part, but him and somebody else sent me some photos last year of all their hands burnt from putting their hands in
yes.
compost.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say what brand it was, but it was a supermarket brand, right? I won't say who it was for fear of being sued. But I wrote to them and asked them about it, to which they told me, our composts are tested, end of conversation. And that was all I had back from them, so which was really poor. But hey, it is what it is, isn't it? Yeah. But compost, if you've got your own, you're in control. Marty's garden, hi mate. Marty follows a system. If it cooks together, well, it'll grow together well. And that's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, good.
What's your thoughts on this, Joe? Example, basil, tomato, and parsley.
Yeah. Right, I mentioned before about basil and tomatoes. Great plants to grow together. If nothing else, for ease of picking, because they are a marriage made in heaven.
Yeah.
But I was saying earlier, Tony, that basil is supposed to improve the flavour of tomatoes if you plant it nearby. Yeah. I haven't found it to be true yet, but I will still grow it. Just because it's so useful.
Jane,
it's beautiful.
You know when you're cooking your tomatoes, you have to put the basil in it. Right, so
that's the bit.
Look, here's my thoughts on it, guys. Right, when you're growing things together, think about what the plant needs, as in temperature, humidity, moisture levels, food. And if they all require the same amount of things, you can plant whatever it is together. Because you often see people planting cucumbers next to tomatoes. But cucumbers need much higher humidity. So for a really good cucumber crop, you want to get the humidity up. Well, you can't do that with tomatoes because you end up with blight. So they're not really good companions. So you need to separate them off I know we all grow them in the same greenhouses and things like that, but put them down one end, keep the tomatoes up the other, and you will get that gradient of humidity. because you can control that a little bit better. But invariably, if it's got the same sort of growing conditions, same watering needs, same feed needs, then you can grow them together. It doesn't matter what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So right, Pam Clark, are you allowing a mass breeding with companion plants, so causing a rise in their presence?
Not understanding the question.
I'm assuming she's on about pests. So are you allowing them to mass breed
Oh, I see. By doing what?
by putting in companion plants?
I don't think so. I think that whenever you are going to have an infestation of whatever sort, there'll be something else that wants to come down and eat it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you do get a
So
whole load of green fly, black fly, there'll be
yeah. So
predators coming to eat that.
look at it this way, Pam. As James saying, you will get a lot of black fly come in or something like that. It's better it goes to like nasturtiums and feeds on that while it's waiting for the live to come. And the worst case scenario, you go there and you cut off a load of the nasturtium and get rid of it. But you can afford to do that. You can't do that if it's your bean plants.
Exactly. And I think I don't know if this is what you're getting at, Pam, but I think some people are frightened because if we say that nasturtiums attract black fly away from your broad beans, they're going to think, well, I don't want nasturtiums in my garden because they're going to attract black fly. So I don't want to attract them at all. But you're going to get them. And it's going to be a choice for you. Do they go on the nasturtiums or do they go on the broad beans? They're not just going to come in because you've got nasturtiums there.
But
If you haven't got a black fly problem, they're not going to come in.
But again, this all boils down to having strong vegetable plants in the first place, not checking them before you put them out. So that also comes down to maybe like now we're all talking about, not wasting electric by, putting lights over things and, trying to bring things on early and stuff like that. So a lot of people now are holding back to sow certain things, right? Yeah. So all I've sown at the moment are my onions and my leeks, right? So they're up in the greenhouse in the cold, end of, right? When they come up, they come up. But the thing is, when you are forcing plants on and then you can't get them out because there's frost due and things like that, you check them in the pots. You can move them up into bigger and bigger pots, but you run out of space, right? So you end up checking their growth. And it's that point the plant becomes stressed. And, when you do put it out, that's when you get that influx of the black fly and things like that, because they're looking for food at that point. Now, if you got good strong plants out and your neighbour doesn't, they're going to your neighbours. But if, for argument's sake, your neighbour's got strong plants as well, we'll give them a weaker plant like nasturtium to focus on instead of your new sort of seed starts, and then you won't have a problem with them. Okay. So Matthew Bradbury, I don't know if this is Lisa or Matthew. We have heaps of manure. Should we leave it in heaps to rot down, or can we chuck it on the beds that haven't got veg still in? So it depends how old it is. If the manure is a good year or so old, then you can just throw it on and let the worms and the microbes and everything else pull it in. They'll do two things. Firstly, do a number of things. Firstly, it'll protect the bed over winter from all the rain because that will compact that soil. It's also why green manures are really good through winter. But secondly, it will keep the ground warmer, and it's also providing a food source for all the microbial life. So if it's about a year old, I'd get it on. If it's fresh, I would compost it first.
Yeah, keep it going.
Jane, are there any plants to deter carrot root fly besides onions?
I don't know because I've never tried anything other than onions. I would guarantee that onions will do it. But no, that's my go-to. That's what I stick with.
So again, when we were talking about the earwigs earlier on, if there's not a companion plant that you want to use or that you can't find, there are other solutions. Yes, you can use Enviromesh and things like that for preventing carrot root fly, but carrot root fly flies really low. About 2 feet is the height it'll fly above the ground. So lift your your carrot bed higher, or grow in containers up on a table or something like that, or anything that's higher than a couple of feet, and you're gonna negate carrot root fly.
Just thinking about it though, Tony, actually, as I think, the reason onions work so well with carrots is, as I was saying before, is they're masking the smell of the carrots. So they're
Garlic would probably
disguising
do
them.
the same.
Garlic might do the same, but also things like your tajitas again, things that exude that strong smell, other sorts of herbs like cilantro, chives, so again, onion family, they would do well.
Yeah.
Think about what they're doing, what their job is, and they can mask the smell.
Yeah, yeah. And again, there are other things you can do. Like I said, it's about being reactive. The issue that a lot of people have is they sow carrot seed way too thick, so then they have to go and thin.
Yeah.
And when you're thinning, you're releasing that into the
smell.
air that attracts a carrot root fly. So there are loads of things a gardener can do to prevent them. And then, obviously, if you want to sow onions or something else that's going to mask the smell of them, even better. But the best thing is water, really later in the evening, so that doesn't get the smell out there, and there's just lots of little tips that you can do to prevent them, as well as companion plant.
Yeah.
Right, last question then. When I plant onions next to my peppers, it seems they do better. Is there a reason why?
I don't know. And I'm saying that because I've never tried it. Again, my onions, carrots, they're the two I use. And I'm thinking about peppers. I don't know that one. That's really interesting. That's something I can look into.
Yeah, it's not something I've done either, because I tend to grow my peppers either in my beds by my tomatoes, or I will grow them in containers on their own if I want to control feeds and stuff separately. So so it's not something I've done, because my onions tend to go out on the edge of my beds, and I'll grow other things in between the beds then, so that they are helping mask smells and stuff. So yeah, that's something I've not come across.
And isn't that interesting though, that, I'm going to go away from this chat thinking, oh, I'm going to look that up.
Yeah.
Because it could be something.
Well, every day's a learning day, Jane, and it doesn't matter how long you'll garden for. And I can tell you now, there was a guy that I have the garden he had, and for those who have watched me for any length of time, you'll know that when I came to this garden, I took one that was on a bit of a slope. Then I moved up and I had like a half plot here, and then I had another full plot next to it. Then I had another full plot next to that. Then I had another half plot. So as basically there was a guy next to me called Keith, and as he was retiring in gardening, if you like, and giving up plots, I was taking them on, and he was like 87 years old, and by the end of it he was growing potatoes in containers because he was seeing the results I was getting.
And learning.
You're never too old to learn, right? Yeah. He'd always grown them in the ground, and then he saw the results I was getting compared to what he was getting, and next year he's grown them in in containers after speaking with me, So it doesn't matter how old we get, right? And some of the stuff we're saying now, in 10 years' time, we might be having a totally different idea about it, because we've learnt more, and that's what it's all about, Gardening's always a learning process.
That's what keeps us interested, yeah.
Yeah,
definitely.
Right, Jane, I'm going to give you a chance now to tell everybody where they can find you. And
okay, you can find me over on YouTube at Jane's Growing Garden, which is very strange for me to say because it's a very recent name change after being Jane's Allotment for 7 years. So YouTube, Jane's Growing Garden. Come along, you'll see my garden in the middle of the UK. You see the chickens, you'll meet the dog, you'll meet Mike. It's a lovely place to be. Find me by the same name over on Facebook. There's a great Facebook group. You have to apply, but it's just a case of we say yes or no. It's very easy. Lovely group of people there. I'm sure there's quite a few of them in the chat today who will vouch for that. And again, Instagram, if you want to see regular updates and pictures from the plot, Jane's Growing Garden over on Instagram. And it would just be really nice to have you over there. So Yeah.
Well, hang on for a moment, Jane. I'll catch you in a second, all right? Right, guys. Well, I know there was a lot of issues with the stream tonight, and I'll try and get my end out. Unfortunately, when you're live, it's very difficult to do things because you have to shut computers down and stuff. But hopefully, there was something to learn here for everybody. I will iron out these things if it kills me, but it's all your set to try us, isn't it? But look, hopefully you've learned something tonight, and we've certainly learned something from you guys as well. So we'll let me just check when we're going to do next week's live, because obviously work patterns. So next week we will be also on Saturday evening at 7 o'clock. So we'll come. I haven't decided what the topic will be for next week, and I don't know if I'll have a guest because I haven't arranged anybody for next week. But if not, it will be myself only. And hopefully I will have ironed out some of these issues here. But the only way to tell that, because it's not for the want of testing. We do all the testing beforehand. Everything works lovely. I go live and it goes tits up. But that's just the way it is. But look, so just remember, as I said earlier on, the shorts are going out every single day, so make sure you get them, because there's just that couple of seconds, 30, 40, 50 seconds tips that are beneficial for learning. And then there'll be this live stream, and there will be a live video going out every single week once I can get some weather for the main videos. They are coming back.